Malcolm X was considered dangerous not because he carried weapons, but because he carried clarity. In a world built on confusion, clarity is threatening. In an era where black people were taught to wait, to hope, to be patient, Malcolm refused patience when patience means humiliation. He did not shout for attention. He spoke with precision. He made and named things as they were. And people fear those who remove the mask from lies they have been growing comfortable wearing. Malcolm understood early that oppression survives not only through force, but through mental conditioning. And once the mind is free, the body eventually follows. During his time, many freedom fighters were fighting the same enemy, but using different languages. Some believed the enemy could be reasoned with, others believed the enemy needed to be confronted, and a few believed the enemy first lived inside the oppressed themselves. Malcolm X stood at the intersection of all three. He was not against peace, dialogue, or unity, but he refused to worship them when they come at the cost of dignity. The question was never simple. Can we live together, but under what conditions and whose expense? When you compare Malcolm X to Martin Luther King Jr., the comparison is often framed as conflict, but in truth it was contrast. King spoke to the moral consciousness of America, believing that justice exposes would shame the system into collection. Malcolm spoke to the self-respect of black people, believing that a people who see themselves clearly will no longer beg for justice. King asked America to change. Malcolm asked black people to remember who they were before America defined them. Both were necessary. One confronted the system internally, the other reviewed the individual internally. Malcolm's evolution is what makes him timeless. Early Malcolm spoke from anger sharpened by experience. Later, Malcolm spoke from understanding sharpened by travel, study, and humility. When he went to Africa and the Middle East, he realized that black struggle was not an isolated incident, but part of a global pattern of domination. This is where Malcolm grew beyond American borders and became international in his thinking. He began to speak not just of civil rights, but human rights. That shift alone threatened global power structures because human rights cannot be confined, negotiated locally, or postponed indefinitely. When you place Malcolm X alongside freedom fighters like Patrice Lumumba, the similarities become striking. Lumumba challenged empire with belief in Congolese dignity, belief that Africa could govern themselves without foreign control. Like Malcolm, Lumumba was not dangerous because of violence, but because of vision. Both men spoke too clearly, too honestly, too soon. Both were removed not because they were failed, but because they were beginning to succeed in waking people up. Thomas Sankara, on the other hand, fought the system with discipline. He believed freedom requires sacrifice, personal examples, and moral consistency. Malcolm shared this belief deeply. Malcolm's discipline was mental and moral. He transformed himself completely, refusing to remain trapped by his past. That transformation itself becomes a message that liberation begins with personal responsibility. Sankara reduced his lifestyle to match the people. Malcolm reduced his ego to match the truth. Both frightened the powerful because they could not be fought. Steve Biko fought oppression where it often hides best, inside the mind. Biko understood that the greatest weapon of oppressor is convincing the oppressed that they were inferior. Malcolm X dedicated his life to destroying that lie. His speeches were not just political, they were psychological interventions. He spoke directly to the wounded self-image of black people, challenging them to see themselves not as victims of history, but as descendants of builders, thinkers, and survivors. In this sense, Malcolm was not just a freedom fighter, he was a healer. What separated Malcolm from many of his contemporaries was his refusal to perform freedom in a way that made the oppressor comfortable. He did not package his message to be palatable. He understood that comfort is often the enemy of change. Many leaders are celebrated because they reassure the system that it will survive reform. Malcolm made no such promise. He warned that system built on exploitation eventually collapses when those they exploit wake up. Today, when we compare Malcolm X to modern freedom fighters, activists, and influencers, the difference becomes evident. Many modern movements are loud, visible, and momentary. They trend, they hashtag, and they disappear. Malcolm was not interested in moments, he was interested in transformation. He did not fight for attention, but for alignment between identity, history, and action. In a world obsessed with visibility, Malcolm reminds us that visibility without substance is just performance. Modern activists often focus on symptoms rather than roots. Malcolm went straight for the roots. He questioned identity, loyalty, and economics, education, and self-worth. He warned against symbolic victories that leave power untouched. He warned against leaders who spoke about freedom but depend on some system they claim to oppose. These warnings feel comfortable today because they still apply. Malcolm X also differed from many freedom fighters then and now in his willingness to publicly change his mind. He admitted when he had been wrong, he adjusted his views when presented with new truth. This is rare. Many leaders fear that growth will be seen as weakness. Malcolm showed that growth is strength. His assassination of froze him in the public imagination, but had he lived longer, he would likely have continued evolving, challenging not only system but also himself. This is why Malcolm X cannot be reduced to a quote, a poster, or a single phase of his life. To do so is to betray his legacy. He was not finished product, he was a process. A reminder that liberation is not destination, but a consistent practice of questioning, learning, and realigning. When you compare Malcolm X to freedom fighters of today, one question becomes unavoidable. Are we fighting to be seen, or are we fighting to be free? Malcolm would likely argue that many modern struggles seek inclusion without transformation, representation without ownership, and recognition without power. He warned that being allowed into a broken house does not make you free. It makes you a guest in someone else's structure. Malcolm's greatest fear was not death, it was mental slavery. He understood that chains change form over time. Where once they were iron, today they are narratives, debt, dependency, and distraction. He warned that a people distracted by consumption cannot organize, and people confused about their identity cannot resist effectively. These words echo louder today than ever. Malcolm X does not belong to one era, one ideology, or one movement. He belongs to every generation that dares to ask itself uncomfortable questions. Not what rights am I allowed, but who benefits from my confusion. Not how do I fit in, but what must be reviewed. He challenges us to examine whether our freedom is real or merely symbolic, whether our confidence is grounded or borrowed, whether our resistance is intentional or performative. In the end, Malcolm X should not be remembered as a man who hated others, but as a man who loved his people enough to tell them the truth. He believed that dignity was not negotiable, that self-respect was revolutionary, and that no one can give you freedom. You must claim it through awareness, discipline, and unity. He was not asking to hate the world. He was asking them to understand it clearly. That is why Malcolm X still unsettles us, not because his words are outdated, but because they are unfinished. They demand response. A decision, a choice, and the question he leaves behind is not meant for history books. It's meant for us. Are you truly free in your mind? Or have you simply learned to survive comfortably inside a cage? Don't forget to subscribe,